Dead of night, 1944, over the Rhine Valley in Germany. Inside the cockpit of a P-61 Black Widow, the air smells of oil, sweat, and ozone. A U.S. Army Air Force's night fighter pilot scans the sky, his eyes sweeping the darkness for the silhouette of a German bomber. He is the alpha predator of the night, the pilot of the most advanced killing machine of his time, a ghost of metal and cannons. His world is simple: hunt or be hunted. Suddenly, his radio crackles, breaking the monotony of the engine. Another pilot's voice, tense and urgent, reports lights following him. Seconds later, he sees them himself. Two spheres of orange light, intensely and supernaturally bright, position themselves at his wingtips. They make no sound. They do not appear on the plane's primitive radar. They are simply there. Instinct takes over. He executes a violent, evasive maneuver, a sharp bank that should leave any pursuer behind. But the lights mimic his movement perfectly, effortlessly, as if magnetically attached to his fuselage. He tries to close in, to line up his sights to fire, but they pull away at a speed that defies logic, vanishing into the darkness. They weren't a weapon. They weren't hostile. They were just there, watching. In that moment, in the solitude of the wartime sky, the pilot understood a terrifying truth. He was not alone, and whatever was with him was not the enemy he had been trained to fight. The Second World War was the greatest crucible of technology humanity had ever known. In just 6 years, aviation leaped from biplanes to jet engines. Radar, once a laboratory curiosity, became the eyes and ears of nations. Rockets, which were little more than glorified fireworks, were transformed into terror weapons capable of crossing seas. In this era of feverish and desperate innovation, anything seemed possible. Scientists and engineers on both sides worked tirelessly on secret weapons that could change the course of the war. Paranoia was the air one breathed. Any anomaly in the sky was, by default, a new and terrifying creation of the enemy. But the first major sign that something alien had entered the conflict did not occur in the skies of Europe, but in the very heart of the United States. On the night of February 24 to 25, 1942, just 3 months after the trauma of Pearl Harbor, the coast of California was living in a state of perpetual panic. Air raid sirens tore through the night's silence in Los Angeles. Radar had detected an unidentified flying object approaching from the ocean. The city was plunged into darkness. And then, the chaos began. A massive, slow-moving object was illuminated by the powerful searchlights of the anti-aircraft defenses. It looked like an airship or a blimp, but no American forces had anything in the air that night. For more than an hour, which must have seemed like an eternity to the terrified citizens, the anti-aircraft batteries of the 37th Coast Artillery Brigade opened fire. The night sky became a hell of tracer fire and explosions. Nearly 1,500 12-pound shells were fired at the silent intruder. The result was surreal. The object, apparently unharmed, continued its slow journey and finally disappeared. On the ground, the panic caused heart attacks and traffic accidents. 6 people died. The only property damage was caused by shrapnel from the Americans, own shells raining down on the city. Officially, the Secretary of the Navy blamed war nerves, a collective hallucination, but photographs from the night, which clearly showed a solid object caught in the beams of light, told a very different story. The mystery then moved to the battlefront. In the autumn of 1944, in the skies over France and Germany, the pilots of the 415th Night Fighter Squadron, the same men flying the advanced P-61 Black Widows, began to report a strange and recurring phenomenon. They described spheres of light, red, orange, white, that appeared out of nowhere during their missions. These lights would follow their planes, sometimes in formation, sometimes alone. They played cat and mouse, closing in on their wings only to accelerate away at impossible speeds when the pilots tried to intercept them. They were not aggressive, they did not fire, but their behavior seemed to denote a curious, playful intelligence. The pilots, pragmatic and battle-hardened men, needed a name for this enigma. Borrowing a phrase from a popular comic strip of the era, they christened them Foo Fighters. At first, the reports were dismissed as combat fatigue or strange reflections, but the sightings became too frequent to be ignored. One intelligence report from the 415th described the objects as balls of fire, that seemed to follow them at 200 miles per hour. Another pilot reported a red sphere that paced him for several minutes before disappearing in the blink of an eye. These men were not prone to fantasy. They were the best pilots in the world, operating under the most stressful conditions imaginable. Their testimony was credible, and they were not alone. Soon, reports multiplied throughout the European theater of operations. Bomber pilots, day fighters, British RAF crews. Everyone began to see the lights. The initial suspicion, of course, was that this was a new and sophisticated psychological weapon or a German tracking device. But then, the phenomenon took a global leap. In the vast Pacific theater, thousands of miles away, pilots of the B-29 Super Fortress bombers flying missions over Japan began to report nearly identical encounters, luminous spheres that escorted their formations, performing maneuvers that defied the laws of aerodynamics. At that moment, intelligence officers in the Allied High Command realized the chilling truth. These were not isolated incidents. This was not a secret weapon from a single country. It was a global pattern. A third participant, silent and enigmatic, had entered the skies of the Second World War. In the strategy rooms of Washington and London, the accumulation of reports on the Foo Fighters could no longer be ignored. Secret files were opened. Intelligence analysts, men whose profession was to find patterns in the chaos of war, were faced with a set of data that made no sense. The first hypothesis, the most logical and reassuring, was that the objects were a German secret weapon, perhaps a new form of radio-guided missile, or a radar jamming device. German technology in rockets and jet aircraft was the most advanced in the world, so the idea was not far-fetched. The order was given to thoroughly investigate this possibility. Technical Intelligence Command, TICOM teams, closely following the Allied invasion forces in Europe, were given a new priority: to interrogate captured German scientists and engineers about any projects related to flying discs or remote-controlled spheres. Figures of the stature of Werner von Braun, the father of the V-2 rocket, and the designers of the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighters were interviewed. The answer they received was unanimous and bewildering. Not only did they deny that such technology was theirs, but they revealed something that completely changed the perspective on the problem. Their own pilots, those of the Luftwaffe, and their Japanese allies, had been reporting the same phenomena for months. The German pilots called them Feuerball, fireball, and were just as perplexed as their Allied counterparts. The enemy was not the author of this mystery. The enemy was also a witness. With the secret weapon theory discarded, the enigma deepened. Pilots were ordered, if the tactical situation permitted, to try to engage the objects. Thus began one of the strangest and most frustrating hunts in military history. The accounts of these encounters are a testament to human powerlessness in the face of the unknown. A pilot of a P-51 Mustang, the best fighter of the war, recounted how he tried to chase a silver sphere of light over Germany. Every time he closed to firing range, the object would accelerate to a speed he estimated at over 1,000 miles per hour, double the top speed of his aircraft, and disappear. There was no smoke trail, no sonic boom. It simply vanished. Another report, from the crew of a B-17 bomber, described how a formation of 15 orange lights escorted them for nearly an hour as they flew over enemy territory. The lights kept a respectful distance, moving in perfect sync with the bomber, as if studying it. The tail gunner kept his machine guns trained on the objects, but he was never ordered to fire. There was no hostility, only an incomprehensible presence that added to the already immense stress of a combat mission. The phenomenon was not only technologically superior, it seemed to have an agenda of its own, one that did not fit into the binary friend or foe logic of war. The frustration was palpable in the official reports. The pilots felt helpless. How do you fight something you can't catch, can't harm, and which seems to have no malicious intent? The fear of ridicule was also a factor. Many encounters were never officially reported for fear that the pilots would be sent for a psychiatric evaluation. It was only when the number of sightings became overwhelming that the men began to speak more openly, discovering that their experiences were shared by hundreds of others. The lowest point, from an intellectual and military perspective, came with the publication of a classified intelligence report by the United States Army Air Forces, USAAF. After collecting and analyzing dozens of sightings from the European theater of operations, the report reached a conclusion that was devastating in its honesty. The document stated, in essence, three things. First, that the phenomena described as foo fighters were undeniably real and not the result of hallucinations or misidentifications. Second, that in many cases they appeared to be under some kind of intelligent control. And third, and most importantly, that they had absolutely no idea what they were. This was a stunning admission for the most powerful military machine on the planet. They were officially acknowledging the existence of an aerial phenomenon that operated with impunity in the most contested skies in the world, a phenomenon that outmatched their best technology and defied their fundamental understanding of physics. It was not an enemy weapon. It was not a known natural phenomenon. It was simply other. The acknowledgement of this total helplessness was the true intellectual climax of the Foo Fighter saga during the war. Military logic had hit a wall of mystery, and the mystery had won. The files were shelved, but the knowledge that something inexplicable was patrolling the skies was seared into the secret consciousness of the Allied High Command. In May 1945, the guns finally fell silent in Europe. In August, the Empire of Japan surrendered. The Second World War was over. The world breathed a collective sigh of relief. Soldiers, sailors, and airmen returned home, and with them, the strange stories of the Foo Fighters seemed to fade away, becoming little more than war anecdotes, overshadowed by tales of heroism and tragedy. It seemed the mystery had left with the war, but it hadn't. The true climax of the phenomenon occurred not during the war, but immediately after. In the summer of 1946, the skies of Scandinavia, primarily over Sweden, became the stage for an unprecedented aerial display. A massive wave of sightings of unidentified flying objects swept the region. The press dubbed them ghost rockets. Over 2,000 reports were received in just a few months, many from trained military observers. The objects were described as cigar or missile-shaped projectiles that flew at low altitude, performed impossible maneuvers like right-angle turns, and often plunged into lakes without a trace. The Swedish government, alarmed, mobilized its defense forces. A special committee was created to investigate the phenomenon. Fighter jets attempted to intercept the objects, but, like the Foo Fighters, the ghost rockets proved to be uncatchable. The lakes where the objects were said to have crashed were dredged. Nothing was found, except for a few fragments of an unknown material that, upon analysis, appeared to be a type of slag or organic residue, not the remains of a missile. The ghost rocket wave was so intense and so well documented that it captured the attention of military intelligence worldwide. It was definitive proof that the phenomenon was real and ongoing. It was in this post-war context that the pieces of the puzzle began to secretly come together. General Jimmy Doolittle, the legendary war hero who led the famous raid on Tokyo, was tasked with conducting a confidential study of the sightings. He traveled to Sweden, reviewed the ghost rocket data, and cross-referenced it with the Foo Fighter reports from the war. His conclusion was unequivocal. The sightings were real, they were not of Soviet origin, and they required a formal, centralized investigation by the United States. Doolittle's reports, along with the growing concern of other high-ranking military figures like General Nathan Twining, became the foundational basis upon which the entire U.S. government's UFO investigation structure was built. The secret files from World War II, which had been shelved, were reopened. They realized that what their pilots had witnessed was not a wartime curiosity, but the prelude to something much larger. In 1947, the same year as the famous Roswell incident, the U.S. Air Force created its first official investigation project, Project Sign. It would be followed by Project Grudge and the famous Project Blue Book. The UFO era had officially begun, but its roots were not in the deserts of New Mexico, but in the blood-soaked skies of the Second World War. The story of the Foo Fighters was largely forgotten by the public, a footnote in the history of the war and a prologue to the more sensational cases that would follow. However, its importance is crucial. It demonstrates, through the testimony of the most credible and battle-hardened observers imaginable, that the UFO phenomenon was not born in the post-war atomic age. It was born in the skies of history's greatest conflict. The final legacy is a profound and unsettling truth. While the most powerful nations on Earth fought to the death in a known, total war, their military leaders, their admirals, and their generals were secretly documenting the beginning of a completely unknown mystery. They were confronted with a third participant in the conflict, one that took no sides, that could not be defeated, and that operated with a technology that, even today, still seems like magic. The war ended, but the enigma it revealed in the skies is still with us, a secret legacy that endures to this day.